The crystalline spires of the research station Harmony's edge pierced through Kepler 442c's perpetual mist like frozen lightning. For 3 standard years, the station had hummed with the quiet efficiency that marked all Zephyrian endeavors. 27 researchers from across the Galactic Coalition worked in perfect synchronization, their varied biologies adapted to the planet's unique atmospheric conditions through a combination of technology and genetic modification. Commander Vex 9 Resonance stood in the central observation deck, her translucent form refracting the pale amber light that filtered through the mist. Her crystalline structure rang with barely contained anxiety, a sound that would have been musical to human ears, though no human had ever heard it. The Zephyrians communicated through harmonic frequencies, and, right now, Vex's song was one of deep concern. The first sign of trouble had come 18 hours ago. Dr. Thale, their xenogeologist, had missed his scheduled harmonic check-in. In Zephyrian society, missing a scheduled communication was like a human forgetting to breathe, virtually impossible unless something was seriously wrong. Within 6 hours, a search team had found Thale's equipment scattered across a mineral extraction site, his tools melted into unrecognizable slag. But there was no body. No trace of what had happened to him. The second incident occurred 12 hours later. 3 researchers working on atmospheric analysis in the lower levels simply vanished. Their workstation showed signs of extreme heat damage, and the metal walls bore strange, perfectly circular holes that seemed to have been burned rather than cut. Security footage showed nothing but static during the critical time period, as if something had interfered with their recording systems. Now, as Vex gazed out into the swirling mist that surrounded their station, she felt the harmonic equivalent of a chill running through her crystalline form. The mist itself seemed different today, thicker, more aggressive. It pressed against the station's shields with an almost sentient hunger. "Commander," came the urgent chime of her communications officer, Kel 7 Harmony. "We're detecting massive seismic activity approaching from the southwest. Multiple signatures, moving in coordinated patterns." Vex's form shifted to a deeper blue resonance, indicating her transition into combat readiness. The Zephyrians were not a warrior species by nature, but they had learned the hard way that the galaxy was full of things that didn't care about their peaceful intentions. "Display the seismic data," she commanded. The holographic projection filled the observation deck with a 3-dimensional map of the surrounding terrain. Red dots moved beneath the surface, dozens of them, each roughly the size of a small spacecraft. They were moving with purpose, converging on the research station from multiple directions. "Estimated time to contact?" Vex asked. "At current speed, 4 hours," Kel replied. "But, Commander, there's something else. These signatures, they're not registering as any known geological phenomenon. The movement patterns suggest organized intelligence." Vex's harmonic song dropped to a low, ominous frequency. In the 300 years since the Zephyrians had joined the Galactic Coalition, they had encountered many hostile species. But something about this felt different. The methodical approach, the way the creatures had systematically eliminated their people, the apparent immunity to their security systems, it all pointed to something far more dangerous than common predators. "Begin evacuation protocols," she ordered. "All non-essential personnel to the escape pods. Send a priority distress signal to Coalition Command." "Commander," interrupted Dr. Senformelity, their chief xenobiologist. His usually stable harmonic signature was fluctuating with excitement and fear. "I've been analyzing the residue from the attack sites. The molecular breakdown suggests exposure to temperatures exceeding 12,000 degrees Celsius, but the damage patterns are too precise for any natural phenomenon." "What are you suggesting, Doctor?" "Whatever attacked our people can generate focused plasma at will. The circular holes in the walls aren't random, they're perfectly calibrated for quick entry and exit. We're dealing with something that hunts with surgical precision." The implications of this analysis sent a discordant note through the command staff. Plasma-based weapons were known throughout the galaxy, but natural organisms capable of generating such focused heat were virtually non-existent. The energy requirements alone should have made such creatures impossible. As if responding to their growing fear, the station's long-range sensors detected something new. Emergency proximity alarms began to sound as massive shapes emerged from the underground tunnel systems surrounding Harmony's edge. Through the mist, they could see dark silhouettes moving with fluid grace, each one easily the size of a Coalition heavy transport. The creatures were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Their bodies seemed to be composed of living rock and metal, with veins of molten material running along their surfaces like glowing arteries. Multiple limbs extended from their central mass, each one ending in appendages that glowed with the same intense heat that had melted their colleagues' equipment. Shields to maximum, Vex commanded, though she suspected their standard defensive systems would prove inadequate against beings that could generate plasma at will. The first creature reached the station's perimeter and simply touched the outer shield barrier. The energy field, designed to withstand meteor impacts and electromagnetic storms, flickered and died within seconds. The creature had somehow absorbed or neutralized the shield's power output without apparent effort. "All escape pods, launch immediately," Vex ordered. "Transmit our research data to Coalition Command. Whatever these creatures are, the galaxy needs to know about them." But, even as she gave the order, she watched 3 of the escape pods get intercepted by flying creatures that emerged from the mist like nightmares given form. These aerial hunters moved with impossible speed, their bodies trailing streams of superheated plasma that cut through the pods' hulls like tissue paper. Only one pod managed to escape the immediate area, carrying 5 researchers toward the outer atmosphere. But, as it climbed, Vex could see more creatures emerging from distant mountain ranges, their glowing forms creating an ominous constellation against the planet's darkening sky. "Coalition emergency frequency open, Commander," Kel reported. "Broadcasting on all bands." Vex stepped forward and began her transmission, her crystalline voice carrying across the void with desperate urgency. "This is Commander Vex 9 Resonance of Research Station Harmony's Edge, Kepler 442c. We are under attack by unknown hostile life forms. Multiple casualties confirmed. The creatures demonstrate advanced plasma generation capabilities and apparent immunity to standard defensive systems. Requesting immediate military assistance." She paused, watching as one of the ground-based creatures began to bore through the station's reinforced foundation with focused heat beams. "All available Coalition forces, please respond. We have approximately 2 hours before station integrity is compromised. These entities represent a clear threat to galactic security. Repeat, requesting immediate military assistance." The transmission echoed across space, carrying with it the coordinates of their location and a desperate plea for salvation. In the vast network of Coalition communications, the message was received by dozens of monitoring stations, military outposts, and patrol vessels. Most of them were too far away to respond in time. But, in the outer rim territories, where the borders between civilized space and the unknown grew thin, one particular vessel received the transmission with interest. The UES Defiance, a United Earth Systems marine transport, had been conducting routine patrol operations when the distress signal reached their communications array. Captain Sarah Chen, a veteran of 12 military campaigns across 4 star systems, studied the transmission data with the calculating eyes of someone who had seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners. Her ship carried a full complement of 200 Marines, some of the toughest fighters humanity had ever produced. "Ma'am," reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, her communications officer. "That signal is coming from deep in Sector 7. According to our navigation charts, it's at least 8 hours at maximum burn." Chen nodded grimly. 8 hours was far too long for any rescue operation to be effective. By the time they arrived, whatever was happening at that research station would be long over. But Sarah Chen had not survived 17 years in the Earth Marines by accepting the impossible. "Helm, plot a course for Kepler 442c, she ordered. "Engineering, I want every available power unit transferred to the engines. We're going to see just how fast this old girl can really move." "Captain," interjected her executive officer, Commander Jackson. "Even with full power, we're looking at 6 hours minimum." The distress signal indicated they had perhaps 2 hours before their position was compromised. Chen's smile was the kind that had made enemy commanders across the galaxy reconsider their life choices. "Then, we better hope they're tougher than they think they are. And, we better hope we're tougher than physics says we should be." As the Defiance's engines roared to life with power levels that technically exceeded safe operational parameters, the ship launched itself toward Kepler 442c with the kind of reckless determination that had become humanity's signature throughout the known galaxy. Behind them, the transmission from Harmony's Edge continued to echo across space, a desperate plea for rescue that most species would consider already too late to answer. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting too late as a final answer. The UES Defiance cut through space like a bullet fired from the barrel of determination itself. In the ship's command center, Captain Chan watched the star charts with the focused intensity of a predator tracking wounded prey. Every minute that passed was another minute the researchers on Kepler 442c were fighting for their lives against impossible odds. "Engineering report," she called out. Chief Engineer Maria Santos appeared on the main screen, her uniform stained with coolant and her expression grim. "Captain, we're running the engines at 115% capacity. The power coupling are holding, but we're generating heat signatures that should technically be impossible for a ship this size. How long can we maintain this pace? Honestly? I have no idea. The engines weren't designed for this kind of sustained output. But the good news is that we're cutting travel time faster than I thought possible. Current ETA is 4 hours and 37 minutes. Chen nodded. Still too long, but better than their original estimate. Keep pushing it, Chief. Those people don't have the luxury of waiting for us to follow regulation protocols. Throughout the ship, 200 United Earth Marines were preparing for a deployment unlike anything in their training manuals. Staff Sergeant Tommy Kowalski, a 20-year veteran with scars from campaigns on 7 different worlds, addressed his squad in the primary deployment bay. Listen up, Marines. We're going into a situation with zero intel on the enemy force composition. What we know is this: they generate plasma hot enough to melt through coalition standard armor, they move underground and through the air with equal facility, and they've already taken out most of a research station full of some of the smartest beings in the galaxy. Private First Class Lou, fresh from basic training but already showing the kind of adaptive thinking that marked the best human soldiers, raised her hand. Sergeant, if they can generate plasma that hot, what makes us think our equipment will be any more effective than what the coalition researchers had? Kowalski's grin was the kind of expression that had terrified drill instructors and enemy combatants in equal measure. Because, Private, we're not coalition researchers. We're human beings, and human beings have a very special talent for figuring out how to kill things that really shouldn't be killed. He gestured to the equipment being distributed throughout the bay. Our armor is designed for multi-environment combat with adaptive cooling systems. Our weapons include plasma rifles, electromagnetic pulse grenades, and enough explosive ordnance to level a small city. But, most importantly, we have something these creatures have never encountered before. What's that, Sergeant? 200 years of experience fighting things that were supposed to be impossible to fight. Humans have a long history of refusing to die when the universe suggests we should. Today, we get to add another chapter to that history. Similar speeches were being given throughout the ship as squad leaders briefed their teams on the tactical situation. The Marines had trained for hostile alien encounters, but this scenario was pushing the boundaries of even their extensive preparation. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Elena Vasquez was reviewing the limited biological data they had managed to extract from the distress signal. As the Defiance's chief xenobiologist and combat medic, she had seen her share of unusual alien physiology, but the reports from Kepler 442c were presenting challenges she had never encountered. Creatures that can generate focused plasma internally, she muttered to herself while reviewing the data. The metabolic requirements alone should make such organisms impossible. The amount of energy needed to create temperatures exceeding 12,000 degrees would require. She paused, her mind racing through the implications of what she was seeing. Unless they're not generating the energy themselves. What if they're tapping into some kind of external power source? The hypothesis was intriguing but didn't change the immediate tactical situation. Regardless of how these creatures powered their abilities, they were still capable of melting through standard armor and defensive systems with apparent ease. Meanwhile, on Kepler 442c, Commander Vex was discovering exactly how resourceful Zephyrians could be when faced with extinction. The research station was now completely surrounded by the plasma-generating creatures, but her people had managed to establish defensive positions in the station's lower levels, where the crystalline architecture provided some protection against the intense heat. "Structural integrity holding at 67%, reported Dr. Sen. "The creatures seem to be probing our defenses rather than mounting a full assault. They're testing our response capabilities." Vex found this behavior both encouraging and deeply concerning. Encouraging because it meant they weren't facing mindless predators, there might be a way to negotiate or at least predict their actions. Concerning because it suggested these creatures were intelligent enough to develop sophisticated hunting strategies. "Any word from the Coalition fleet?" she asked. "Negative, Commander. The nearest Coalition vessel is still 14 hours away. However..." Kel paused, his harmonic signature fluctuating with uncertainty. "We did receive a response to our distress signal." "From whom?" "A United Earth Systems marine transport. Designation UES Defiance. They report an ETA of approximately 4 hours. Vex's crystalline form shifted to a deep amber color, the Zephyrian equivalent of confusion. "United Earth Systems? I'm not familiar with that designation." "Neither was I, Commander. But, according to Galactic Registry records, it's a recently established human military organization. The ship is carrying a full complement of combat personnel." Dr. Sen interjected with a harmonic note of skepticism. "Humans?" "Commander, with all due respect to our galactic neighbors, humans have only been space-capable for approximately 2 centuries. What could they possibly do against creatures that have overwhelmed our far more advanced defensive systems?" It was a fair question. In the broader galactic community, humans were considered something of a curiosity, a young species that had achieved faster-than-light travel through brute force engineering rather than the elegant solutions developed by older civilizations. Most Coalition members viewed them as enthusiastic but, ultimately primitive newcomers to the galactic stage. But, Vex had read the classified reports from the Outer Rim conflicts, where human military units had achieved results that defied conventional tactical analysis. There was something about the human approach to warfare that seemed to operate outside normal strategic parameters. "Dr. Sen, at this point I'm willing to accept help from any source. If the humans believe they can reach us in time, then, we hold our position and hope they're more capable than their reputation suggests." As if responding to her words, the creatures outside suddenly intensified their assault. The station's outer hull began to glow with cherry-red heat as dozens of plasma beams focused on critical structural points. Emergency systems activated throughout the facility as temperatures in the outer sections climbed toward lethal levels. "All personnel to inner core positions," Vex commanded. "Seal the blast doors and activate emergency life support." Through the station's external sensors, she could see the creatures moving with renewed purpose. Their coordinated assault patterns suggested they had completed their assessment of the station's defenses and were now moving to the final phase of their attack. The next 3 hours passed with agonizing slowness. The Zephyrian survivors huddled in the station's central core while the creatures systematically dismantled their outer defenses. Layer by layer, the plasma beams ate through reinforced barriers, melted through emergency blast doors, and reduced sophisticated defensive systems to molten slag. But, the research station had been built to Coalition standards, with multiple redundant protective systems. Even as the creatures breached the outer levels, there were still several barriers between them and the survivors. The question was whether those barriers would hold long enough for rescue to arrive. In space, the UES Defiance continued its impossible journey toward Kepler 442c. The ship's engines were now operating at levels that violated multiple safety regulations, but Chief Engineer Santos had somehow managed to keep them functional through a combination of technical skill and what she privately referred to as applied stubbornness. 1 hour to destination, Captain, reported the navigation officer. Chen studied the tactical display showing their approach to the planet. Kepler 442c was shrouded in dense atmospheric mist that would interfere with both sensors and communications. They would be going in essentially blind, with no reliable intelligence on enemy positions or capabilities. "Communications, any updates from the research station?" "Sporadic contact, ma'am." Their transmission equipment appears to be damaged, but we're still receiving automated distress signals. They're alive, but their situation is deteriorating rapidly. Chen nodded and activated the ship-wide communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We're approaching our destination, and I want everyone to understand what we're walking into. We're about to engage hostile alien life forms that have capabilities exceeding anything in our tactical databases. The enemy can generate focused plasma weapons, they operate both underground and in atmospheric flight, and they've already demonstrated the ability to overcome advanced defensive systems. She paused, looking around at her command crew. By any reasonable military assessment, this mission should be classified as a suicide run. We're outnumbered by an unknown factor, outgunned by creatures with natural weapons that outclass our technology, and operating in an environment that limits our tactical options. Another pause. Which is exactly the kind of situation human Marines have been training for since we first figured out how to strap rockets to metal boxes and shoot ourselves into space. These creatures may be tough, but they've never faced anything like us. They've never had to deal with beings crazy enough to fly across the galaxy at impossible speeds just to pick a fight with something that should be able to kill us. Through the ship's corridors, 200 Marines checked their equipment one final time and prepared for deployment. They were about to face creatures that had effortlessly destroyed one of the most advanced research facilities in the galaxy, using nothing but standard human military equipment and the kind of tactical insanity that had become their species' signature throughout the known universe. As the Defiance entered Kepler 442c's atmosphere, Captain Chen felt the familiar calm that came with the moment before battle. In 15 minutes, they would either save the research station's survivors or add their names to the list of those who would die trying. But failure wasn't really an option. It never was. For humans, the UES Defiance descended through Kepler 442c's atmosphere like a controlled meteor, its hull glowing with re-entry heat while its engines roared in defiance of the planet's gravitational pull. On the bridge, Captain Chen watched as their sensors struggled to penetrate the dense mist that seemed to cover the entire planetary surface. Atmospheric analysis complete, Captain, reported Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez. The mist isn't natural weather phenomena. It's composed of microscopic crystalline particles that interfere with both electromagnetic and optical sensors. We're essentially flying blind below 2,000 meters altitude. Chen nodded grimly. Of course the planet would have conditions that negated their technological advantages. That seemed to be the universe's standard operating procedure when dealing with human military operations. Any contact with the research station? Affirmative. We're receiving leak signals from Commander Vex 9 Resonance. The station is still intact, but barely. She reports they've retreated to the central core and are using emergency power only. Time to full atmospheric penetration? 7 minutes, ma'am. Chen activated the deployment bay communications. All Marine units, this is the captain. We're going in hot and blind. The mist will interfere with standard tactical coordination, so squad leaders need to maintain close formation and be prepared for independent operations. In the primary deployment bay, Staff Sergeant Kowalski was making final equipment checks with his squad. The 12 Marines under his command represented a typical cross-section of human military diversity, experienced veterans mixed with promising newcomers, all of them equipped with the kind of adaptive gear that had proven effective in humanity's brief but eventful military history. Listen up, Kowalski announced. We're dropping into a combat zone where visibility is going to be near zero and the enemy has home field advantage. Standard deployment protocols are out the window. We stick together, we watch each other's backs, and we remember that these creatures have never faced anything like us before. Private Lou checked her plasma rifle's power coupling for the third time. Sergeant, what if our weapons aren't effective against these things? Then, we improvise, Private. Humans have been improvising our way out of impossible situations since before we figured out how to make fire. The creatures down there may be able to generate plasma that melts through coalition armor, but they've never had to deal with Marines who are too stupid to know when they're beaten. Corporal Martinez, a veteran of the Centauri border conflicts, looked up from his equipment pack. Sergeant, I've been thinking about the tactical reports. These creatures hunt in coordinated groups and they seem to be probing defensive capabilities before committing to full assault. That suggests intelligence and planning. Good observation, Martinez. Which means we can't just overwhelm them with firepower. We need to outthink them as well as outfight them. The ship's intercom crackled to life. All units, prepare for combat deployment. Atmospheric entry in 30 seconds. Throughout the Defiance, 16 squads of Marines completed their final preparations. Each squad was equipped for independent operation in hostile environments: plasma rifles, electromagnetic pulse grenades, adaptive armor systems, and enough ammunition to sustain combat operations for up to 72 hours. But, perhaps more importantly, each squad carried something that had proven far more valuable than any piece of equipment: the accumulated tactical experience of a species that had learned to survive by refusing to accept the impossible. The Defiance broke through the lower atmospheric layers and immediately encountered the full intensity of Kepler 442c's mist environment. Visibility dropped to less than 50 meters in any direction, and their sensors registered a bewildering array of interference patterns that made accurate targeting nearly impossible. "There," called out the tactical officer. "Bearing 270, distance approximately 6 kilometers. I'm detecting heat signatures consistent with the research station." But they could also see dozens of other heat signatures moving around the station in complex patterns. The creatures were still conducting their assault, completely unaware that rescue was approaching through the mist. Captain Shen made the kind of command decision that separated exceptional officers from merely competent ones. "All units, prepare for immediate combat deployment. We're not waiting for optimal positioning. Those people need help now." The deployment bays opened, and 16 squads of United Earth Marines dropped toward the surface of Kepler 442c through mist so thick it seemed almost solid. Their descent systems were designed for precision landing, but the atmospheric interference made accurate navigation almost impossible. Staff Sergeant Kowalski and his squad landed approximately 200 meters from their intended drop zone, in a small clearing surrounded by what appeared to be natural rock formations. The mist swirled around them like living smoke, reducing visibility to the point where Marines could barely see each other at arm's length. "Squad report," Kowalski called through his communications system. "Rodriguez here, landed safe. Can't see a damn thing, but I'm reading heat signatures all around us." Martinez reporting. "We're definitely not alone down here. Something big is moving through the mist about 50 meters to our east." Kowalski activated his enhanced sensor array, one of the few pieces of equipment that seemed to function properly in the mist environment. The readings he received made him reassess their tactical situation immediately. "People, we've got creatures surrounding our position. Count shows at least 8 contacts, each one roughly the size of a small vehicle. They're not approaching directly, they're circling us." Private Lou checked her plasma rifle's charge indicator. "Orders, Sergeant?" Kowalski grinned, though no one could see his expression through the helmet and mist. "We do what Marines do best, Private. We take the initiative." What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as an example of human tactical adaptation under impossible circumstances. Instead of waiting for the creatures to attack, Kowalski's squad moved toward the nearest heat signature with the kind of aggressive confidence that characterized human military doctrine. The first creature they encountered was unlike anything in their training materials. Standing nearly 3 meters tall and composed of what appeared to be living rock and metal, it moved through the mist with fluid grace. Veins of molten material ran along its surface like glowing arteries, and multiple appendages extended from its central mass, each one ending in specialized manipulator organs that radiated intense heat. "Contact front," called Rodriguez. "Engaging hostile." The creature detected their approach and immediately responded with a focused beam of plasma that would have melted through any standard coalition armor. But human military equipment was designed around different principles than coalition technology. Instead of trying to create impermeable barriers, human armor systems were designed to disperse and redirect energy attacks. Rodriguez's armor flared with absorbed energy, but the dispersal systems successfully channeled the heat away from his body. He was still functional, still combat effective, and definitely still angry. That tickled, he announced, and opened fire with his plasma rifle. The human plasma weapons were less sophisticated than coalition energy systems, but they had one critical advantage: they were designed to be operated by beings who had learned warfare through trial and error over thousands of years of constant conflict. Where coalition weapons prioritized elegant energy efficiency, human weapons prioritized the ability to keep firing until the target stopped moving. Rodriguez's plasma rifle discharged a continuous stream of superheated energy that caught the creature's center mass and held it there through pure persistence. The creature's natural armor began to glow and crack under the sustained assault. But the creature was far from helpless. It responded by generating multiple plasma beams simultaneously, forcing the entire squad to take cover behind the rocky formations scattered throughout the area. "Kowalski to all squads," the sergeant called through the communications network. "Be advised, hostile creatures can generate multiple simultaneous plasma attacks. Standard cover tactics are effective. Repeat, these things can be hurt with sustained fire." The message went out to all 16 squads as they engaged similar creatures throughout the combat zone. What the Marines discovered was that while the creatures possessed formidable natural weapons, they had never encountered opponents who approached combat with the systematic ruthlessness that characterized human military doctrine. Squad 7, led by Sergeant Patricia Nakamura, found themselves facing 3 creatures that had emerged from underground tunnels. Instead of engaging in a direct firefight, Nakamura ordered her team to use electromagnetic pulse grenades to disrupt whatever energy systems the creatures used to generate their plasma attacks. "Throw them at the brightest parts," she ordered. "If these things are channeling energy, let's see what happens when we interfere with their power flow." The EMP grenades detonated in sequence, creating electromagnetic fields that interfered with the creature's bioelectrical systems. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The creature's plasma generation capabilities flickered and died, leaving them temporarily vulnerable to conventional weapons fire. "All squads, this is Nakamura," she broadcast. "EMP grenades are effective against creature weapon systems. Target the glowing areas for maximum disruption." Squad 12, commanded by Sergeant Davis, discovered that the creatures had difficulty tracking multiple fast-moving targets simultaneously. His squad adopted hit-and-run tactics, using the mist as concealment while they struck at the creatures from unexpected directions. "They're smart, but they think like pack hunters," Davis reported. "They expect prey to run or hide. They don't expect prey to split up and attack them from 6 different directions at once." Throughout the combat zone, human Marines were adapting their tactics in real time, sharing information and developing countermeasures with the kind of flexible thinking that had made their species notorious throughout the galaxy. The creatures were discovering that they had encountered an opponent unlike anything in their previous experience. But the most significant development came when Staff Sergeant Kowalski's squad reached the research station's perimeter. Through the mist, they could see the crystalline structure of the Zephyrian facility, its walls glowing with absorbed heat from the creature's sustained assault. "Kowalski to command," he called. "We've reached the research station. The structure is still intact, but I'm reading massive heat buildup throughout the facility. These creatures have been working on breaking through the defenses for hours." Captain Chen's voice crackled through the communication system. "What's your assessment, Sergeant?" Kowalski studied the tactical situation through his enhanced sensors. The creatures had positioned themselves around the station in a sophisticated siege formation, with some units maintaining the assault while others appeared to be standing guard against potential rescue attempts. "Ma'am, these things are running a textbook siege operation. They're systematically dismantling the station's defenses while maintaining perimeter security. But they made one critical mistake." "What's that, Sergeant?" Kowalski's grin was audible in his voice. "They planned their siege assuming their opponents would follow conventional tactical doctrine. They never planned for dealing with humans who don't give a damn about conventional tactical doctrine." What happened next would become known as the Battle of Harmony's Edge, the first major engagement between human forces and the creatures that the galaxy would eventually learn to call the Thermal Hunters. It was a battle that would establish humanity's reputation as the species too stubborn to accept defeat, even when faced with enemies that should have been impossible to overcome. The Marines were about to demonstrate why humans had become the galaxy's most feared military force in less than 2 centuries of interstellar warfare. It wasn't because they were stronger or faster or more advanced than their opponents. It was because they were absolutely, completely, and irrationally unwilling to lose. Staff Sergeant Kowalski crouched behind a formation of crystallized mineral deposits, studying the siege formation that surrounded the research station. Through his enhanced optics, he could see at least 15 of the creatures maintaining their systematic assault on the facility's outer barriers. Their plasma beams had already breached 3 layers of defensive barriers, and the inner core where the survivors sheltered was beginning to show signs of heat stress. "All squads, this is Kowalski," he broadcast. "I'm looking at a classic siege formation with one critical weakness. These creatures have focused all their attention on the target and none on perimeter security. They're about to learn why that's a bad idea when dealing with human Marines." Captain Chen's voice came through the communication system with crystal clarity. "What do you have in mind, Sergeant?" "Ma'am, we're going to do something these creatures won't expect. Instead of trying to break through their formation, we're going to collapse it from the inside out. But I need coordination from all squads for this to work." Kowalski activated his tactical display and began outlining a plan that violated every conventional rule of siege warfare. Instead of attempting to relieve the besieged facility through direct assault, the Marines would allow themselves to be surrounded by the creatures, then use their superior mobility and communication systems to create chaos within the enemy formation. "Squads 1 through 4, I need you to create noise approximately 500 meters northwest of the station. Make them think you're the main assault force. Squads 5 through 8, position yourselves southeast and wait for my signal. Squads 9 through 16, you're the hammer. When I give the word, you come in from all directions at once." The plan required precise timing and the kind of battlefield coordination that most species developed over centuries of military evolution. Humans had managed to achieve the same level of tactical sophistication in less than 200 years, mainly through the simple expedient of fighting everything they encountered until they figured out what worked. Squad 1, led by Corporal Williams, moved toward their designated position through the mist. The creatures detected their movement almost immediately, but responded exactly as Kowalski had predicted. Instead of maintaining their siege formation, 6 of the creatures broke off to intercept what they perceived as the primary threat. "Contact front," Williams reported. 6 hostiles approaching our position. Beginning engagement." Williams' squad opened fire with coordinated plasma rifle volleys, each Marine targeting a different creature while maintaining constant movement through the mist. The creatures responded with their characteristic focused plasma beams, but found themselves unable to maintain accurate targeting against multiple fast-moving opponents. The engagement served its purpose perfectly. The creature's attention was completely focused on the apparent assault force, leaving gaps in their siege formation that the other squads could exploit. "Squads 5 through 8, move to secondary positions," Kowalski commanded. "Squads 9 through 16, begin infiltration." What followed was a masterpiece of tactical coordination. 8 squads of Marines moved through the mist with the kind of silent precision that had made human special forces legendary throughout the galaxy. They used the creature's own siege formation against them, moving through the spaces between enemy positions while the defenders remained focused on the diversionary assault. Sergeant Nakamura's squad reached the research station's eastern wall without detection, finding themselves less than 50 meters from 3 creatures that were methodically burning through the facility's secondary barriers. "Target acquired," she whispered into her communication system. 3 hostiles, completely exposed. Beginning coordinated assault. Her squad deployed in a classic envelopment formation, with each fire team taking position to attack from a different direction simultaneously. When Nakamura gave the signal, 12 Marines opened fire on the 3 creatures with everything they had. The creatures had never experienced anything like it. Instead of facing a single opponent or even a coordinated group attacking from one direction, they found themselves under assault from 3 different positions at once. Their plasma generation systems could target multiple threats, but not while maintaining the sustained fire needed to breach the station's defenses. "Enemy formation disrupted," Nakamura reported. "They're trying to respond to multiple threat vectors simultaneously. Their plasma output is becoming scattered and ineffective." Throughout the combat zone, similar engagements were taking place as Marine squads struck at the creatures from positions they had never expected to be attacked from. The beings that had seemed invincible while conducting their systematic siege found themselves fighting a completely different kind of battle. But the creatures were not helpless. They began to adapt to the human tactics with disturbing speed, reorganizing their formation to account for multi-directional threats. Some of the larger specimens demonstrated the ability to generate defensive plasma barriers while continuing their assault on the research station. It was Corporal Martinez who discovered the creature's most significant vulnerability. His squad had become pinned down by two creatures that had generated overlapping plasma barriers, creating a defensive position that seemed impregnable to conventional attack. "These things are smart," Martinez called out to his squad. "But they're thinking like engineers, not like soldiers. They're trying to create perfect defensive positions instead of maintaining operational flexibility." He studied the creature's barrier formation and realized they had made a critical tactical error. Their plasma barriers provided excellent protection against frontal assault, but they had positioned themselves in a way that made rapid movement impossible. "Squad, prepare fragmentation grenades," Martinez ordered. "We're not going to try to break through their defenses. We're going to make their defensive position untenable." The fragmentation grenades weren't designed to penetrate the creature's natural armor or their plasma barriers. They were designed to create debris fields that would force the creatures to choose between maintaining their defensive positions and protecting themselves from environmental hazards. The explosions filled the air around the creatures with high-velocity rock fragments and crystalline debris from the planet's surface. The creature's plasma barriers were effective against directed energy weapons, but they provided no protection against kinetic projectiles moving at extreme velocity. Faced with the choice between maintaining their formation and protecting themselves from the debris storm, the creatures chose self-preservation. Their plasma barriers collapsed as they attempted to generate defensive fields against the fragmentation attack. "All squads, fragmentation grenades are effective," Martinez broadcast. "Target the ground around their positions, not the creatures themselves. Make them choose between offense and defense." The tactical shift was immediate and decisive. Throughout the combat zone, Marine squads began using fragmentation weapons to force the creatures out of their defensive positions. The beings that had seemed invincible while fighting from prepared positions found themselves struggling to maintain effectiveness while under constant harassment from kinetic attacks. Staff Sergeant Kowalski watched the battle develop through his tactical display and realized they had achieved something remarkable. In less than 30 minutes of combat, human Marines had adapted to an enemy they had never encountered before and developed countermeasures that were proving consistently effective. "All squads, this is Kowalski," he announced. "We've got them off balance. Time to press the advantage. Converge on the research station from all directions. These creatures are about to learn what happens when they pick a fight with humans." The final phase of the battle was unlike anything the creatures had ever experienced. Instead of facing the systematic, predictable assault patterns they had evolved to counter, they found themselves fighting opponents who seemed to operate according to principles that made no tactical sense. Human Marines advanced through heavy plasma fire not because they were immune to damage, but because they had calculated that aggressive forward movement would create more confusion among the defenders than cautious advancement. They used weapons that were technically inferior to the creature's natural capabilities, but employed them with such persistent aggression that the creature's sophisticated plasma generation systems became overwhelmed. Squad after squad of Marines broke through the creature's perimeter defenses, not through superior firepower, but through the simple expedient of refusing to be stopped by obstacles that should have been insurmountable. Private Liu, who had been terrified during the initial deployment, found herself part of a fire team that had successfully neutralized two creatures and was advancing on a third. The fear was still there, but it had been transformed into something far more useful, the kind of focused rage that made human soldiers legendary throughout the galaxy. "These things picked the wrong species to mess with," she called out to her squad while laying down covering fire with her plasma rifle. "They wanted a fight? Well, congratulations. They found the one species in the galaxy that enjoys fighting impossible odds. Commander Vex, observing the battle through the research station's external sensors, watched in amazement as the human marines systematically dismantled a siege formation that had seemed unbreakable. The creatures that had effortlessly destroyed her facility's defenses were being driven back by opponents who seemed to operate according to military principles she didn't recognize. Dr. Sen, she called to her xenobiologist. "Are you recording this engagement?" "Yes, Commander. And, I must admit, I'm having difficulty analyzing the human tactical approach. They seem to be employing strategies that prioritize aggression over self-preservation. By any rational assessment, their attack patterns should result in excessive casualties. But, they're working," Vex observed. "The creatures are being forced to abandon their siege positions." What neither of them realized was that they were witnessing the fundamental difference between human military doctrine and that of every other species in the galaxy. Where most civilizations had developed warfare as an extension of their natural competitive behaviors, humans had developed warfare as a solution to the problem of survival in an environment that was actively trying to kill them. The result was a military philosophy that treated impossible situations as routine challenges and approached overwhelming odds as opportunities to demonstrate superior tactical thinking. The creatures, for their part, were discovering that their natural advantages meant nothing against opponents who refused to be impressed by superior firepower. They had evolved to hunt prey that would run or hide when faced with overwhelming force. They had no evolutionary experience with prey that responded to overwhelming force by becoming more aggressive and more determined. As the battle reached its climax, Staff Sergeant Kowalski found himself face to face with what appeared to be the largest of the creatures, a specimen that stood nearly 4 meters tall and generated plasma beams hot enough to melt through solid rock. By any reasonable assessment, he was hopelessly outmatched. Kowalski grinned and opened fire with his plasma rifle while simultaneously calling for support from his entire squad. "All units, priority target at my location," he announced. "Big ugly creature that thinks it's tougher than United Earth Marines. Let's show it what happens when it makes that kind of mistake." The creature that had terrorized an entire research station full of advanced beings found itself facing something it had never encountered before, opponents who became more dangerous when faced with impossible odds, not less. The largest of the creatures stood before Staff Sergeant Kowalski like a living mountain of molten rock and metal, its multiple appendages weaving patterns in the air as it generated plasma beams that turned the surrounding mist into superheated steam. This was clearly the alpha specimen, the creature that had coordinated the entire assault on the research station. Kowalski had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. The creature was not just larger and more powerful than its companions, it was demonstrably more intelligent. It had observed the human tactics throughout the battle and adapted its approach accordingly. Instead of generating the focused plasma beams that had proven vulnerable to marine armor systems, the creature created a continuous field of superheated energy that filled the space between them. Moving through the field would mean certain death, even for someone wearing the most advanced human military protection. But Kowalski had not survived 17 years of military service by accepting limitations as permanent obstacles. "Martinez, Rodriguez, flank left. Williams, Thompson, flank right. Lou, you're with me. We're going straight through the middle." "Sergeant," Lou called out, "that energy field will kill us if we try to cross it directly." Kowalski's grin was audible through the communication system. "Private, that's exactly what this creature wants us to think. But, it's making the same mistake all our enemies make. It's assuming we'll behave rationally." He activated his armor's emergency power systems, channeling every available energy unit into the suit's protective barriers. "All squad members, emergency power to defensive systems. We're going to do something really stupid, and I need everyone to survive being really stupid." The creature watched in apparent confusion as 6 human marines advanced directly toward its energy field instead of seeking cover or attempting to flank around the obstacle. This behavior made no tactical sense from any rational perspective. Which was exactly what made it effective. The creature had evolved to hunt prey that followed predictable behavioral patterns when threatened. Prey ran away, or hid, or attempted to negotiate. Prey did not advance directly into lethal energy fields while maintaining aggressive fire. The human armor systems were not designed to provide complete protection against plasma fields of this intensity. But they were designed to keep their occupants alive long enough to complete their mission objectives, regardless of the environmental hazards involved. Kowalski's squad charged through the energy field with their armor glowing white-hot and their internal systems pushing beyond safety limitations. The crossing took approximately 3 seconds, during which each Marine absorbed enough energy to power a small city for a day. But they made it through, and they maintained effective fire the entire time. The creature found itself facing 6 opponents at point-blank range, all of them firing plasma rifles with the kind of sustained aggression that characterized human military doctrine. More importantly, it discovered that its primary defensive capability, the energy field that should have made it untouchable, had been completely negated by opponents who were apparently insane enough to charge through certain death to reach their target. "All squads, this is Kowalski," he called out while his squad systematically dismantled the creature's defenses. The big ones generate energy fields instead of directed beams. The fields can be crossed if you're willing to absorb the damage and keep moving. Repeat, these things can be reached with direct assault tactics. Throughout the combat zone, Marine squads received this intelligence and immediately began applying it to their own engagements. The creatures that had seemed invincible when fighting from defensive positions found themselves facing opponents who treated energy barriers as minor inconveniences rather than insurmountable obstacles. But, perhaps more significantly, the creatures were beginning to demonstrate something that surprised everyone involved in the battle: they were capable of learning from defeat. The smaller specimens throughout the combat zone began to retreat toward a series of underground tunnels, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested tactical communication. They were not fleeing in panic, they were conducting a strategic withdrawal to more defensible positions. Captain Chen, monitoring the battle from the Defiance's command center, recognized the implications immediately. "All squad leaders, be advised. These creatures are demonstrating adaptive behavior. They're learning from our tactics and modifying their approach accordingly." Sergeant Nakamura, whose squad had just successfully neutralized 3 creatures near the research station's eastern perimeter, confirmed the observation. "Captain, the hostiles in our area are moving to underground positions. They're avoiding direct confrontation and attempting to force us into tunnel fighting." Underground combat was one of the most challenging scenarios in human military doctrine. The confined spaces negated many of their tactical advantages while amplifying the creature's natural abilities. In narrow tunnels, the creatures could generate plasma barriers that would be impossible to bypass, while their superior knowledge of the underground terrain would make them nearly unbeatable. Which meant the Marines needed to prevent the creatures from reaching those tunnels. "All squads, priority mission update," Captain Chen announced. "Prevent hostile retreat to underground positions. We cannot allow these creatures to establish defensive positions in terrain that favors their capabilities." What followed was a running battle across the mist-shrouded landscape around Research Station Harmony's edge. Human Marines pursued creatures that were systematically attempting to reach prepared defensive positions, while the creatures used every advantage of their home terrain to slow the pursuit. The engagement revealed both the strengths and limitations of human tactical doctrine. Where the creatures attempted to establish traditional defensive lines, the Marines broke through with the kind of aggressive assault tactics that had made them famous throughout the galaxy. But, where the creatures used their superior mobility and environmental knowledge to conduct hit-and-run attacks, the Marines found themselves fighting a much more challenging battle. It was Corporal Martinez who developed the tactical solution that turned the engagement in humanity's favor. His squad had been pursuing 2 creatures toward a tunnel entrance when he realized they were being led into a trap. The creatures weren't just retreating, they were attempting to draw the Marines into prepared ambush positions. "All squads, this is Martinez," he broadcast. "The hostiles are trying to channel us into kill zones. But they're making the same mistake they've been making all day. They're thinking like hunters instead of thinking like soldiers." He outlined a tactical approach that would become known as the Martinez reversal in Marine training manuals. Instead of pursuing the creatures toward their prepared positions, the Marines would force the creatures to come to them by threatening something the creatures couldn't afford to lose. "Squad leaders, identify the tunnel entrances in your areas. We're not going to chase these things underground. We're going to make them choose between abandoning their escape routes and facing us in open combat." Marine squads throughout the combat zone began deploying explosives at tunnel entrances, creating a systematic demolition pattern that would collapse the underground network the creatures were depending on for retreat. The creatures faced a choice: fight the Marines in open terrain where human tactics were most effective, or lose their primary tactical advantage forever. The creatures chose to fight. The final engagement took place in the clearing surrounding research station Harmony's Edge, where nearly 20 of the creatures emerged from their underground positions to prevent the destruction of their tunnel network. It was exactly the kind of open battle that favored human tactical doctrine. 200 United Earth Marines formed a coordinated battle line and opened fire with everything they had. Plasma rifles, electromagnetic pulse grenades, fragmentation weapons, and enough explosive ordnance to level a small mountain were deployed against creatures that had never faced anything like organized human military power. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, the mist around the research station was slowly clearing, revealing a landscape that had been permanently altered by plasma fire and explosive ordnance. The creatures lay scattered across the battlefield, their natural armor finally overwhelmed by the sustained aggression of opponents who treated impossible odds as routine challenges. Staff Sergeant Kowalski stood in the center of the battlefield, his armor still glowing with absorbed heat, and activated his communication system. Research Station Harmony's Edge, this is United Earth Marines. Area secured. Hostile forces neutralized. Request status on survivors. Commander Vex's crystalline voice came through with a harmonic frequency that conveyed amazement and gratitude in equal measure. Sergeant Kowalski, this is Commander Vex 9 Resonance. 17 Zephyrian personnel confirmed alive and uninjured. We cannot adequately express our gratitude for what you have accomplished here. Captain Chen's voice joined the communication link. Commander Vex, this is Captain Chen of the UES Defiance. We're deploying medical and engineering teams to assist with facility repairs and evacuation procedures. Are there any immediate medical emergencies among your personnel? Negative, Captain. Our people are physically unharmed, though I suspect we will require some time to process what we have witnessed here today. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the Defiance's chief medical officer, was already making her way across the battlefield toward the research station. Her preliminary assessment of the engagement had identified several significant discoveries that would require detailed study. The creatures, it turned out, were not native to Kepler 442c. They were refugees from a failed colony world, survivors of an ecological disaster that had destroyed their original home. Their assault on the research station had been motivated by desperation rather than natural aggression. They needed the facility's resources to establish a new colony. But they had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed that all spacefaring species would respond to overwhelming force the same way their previous opponents had, with surrender or retreat. They had never encountered a species that responded to overwhelming force by becoming more aggressive and more determined. As the survivors of both sides began the process of treating wounded and assessing damage, Commander Vex approached Staff Sergeant Kowalski with the careful movements of someone who was still trying to process what she had witnessed. Sergeant, I must ask you something that has been troubling me throughout this engagement. Your tactical approach seemed to prioritize aggression over self-preservation. By any rational military assessment, your casualties should have been devastating. How did you achieve such effectiveness against opponents with superior natural capabilities? Kowalski removed his helmet and ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. Commander, I think you're asking the wrong question. You want to know how we beat creatures that should have been able to kill us. But that's not what happened here. Vex's crystalline form shifted to a harmonic frequency indicating confusion. I do not understand, Sergeant. Ma'am, we didn't beat these creatures because we were stronger or faster or better armed than they were. We beat them because we're human beings, and human beings have a very specific approach to impossible situations. He gestured toward the battlefield where his fellow Marines were already beginning cleanup operations. Every one of these Marines grew up on a planet where the environment was actively trying to kill them. We evolved as persistence hunters on a world where everything was bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we were. We learned to survive by being too stubborn to die and too aggressive to quit. Vex processed this information with the analytical precision that characterized Zephyrian thinking. You're suggesting that your species' evolutionary history has created military capabilities that exceed your technological advantages? Commander, I'm saying that we're the galaxy's apex predators not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we're the only species that looks at impossible odds and thinks challenge accepted. These creatures were tough, but they never had to deal with opponents who get more dangerous when faced with superior force. As rescue operations continued throughout the day, word of the Battle of Harmony's Edge began to spread across the galactic communication networks. The story of 200 human Marines defeating creatures that had overwhelmed advanced coalition defenses became the subject of intense analysis and speculation among military strategists throughout known space. But perhaps the most significant impact was on humanity's reputation within the galactic community. Where they had previously been considered enthusiastic newcomers to interstellar civilization, they were now recognized as something far more significant, the species you called when facing impossible situations that required impossible solutions. The creatures, meanwhile, were eventually relocated to a suitable colony world where they could establish the settlement they desperately needed. But they carried with them a lesson that would be passed down through their cultural memory for generations. There were some species in the galaxy that became more dangerous when threatened, not less. And humans were definitely one of those species. As the UES Defiance prepared to depart Kepler 442c with the rescued researchers aboard, Captain Chen stood on the bridge watching the mist finally clear from the planet's surface. The battle had been won, the survivors had been rescued, and humanity had once again proven that they were capable of achieving the impossible when circumstances required it. But, perhaps more importantly, they had demonstrated something that would reshape galactic understanding of human capabilities. When other species called for rescue and none seemed to be coming, humans were the ones who emerged from the mist with the kind of determined aggression that made impossible situations suddenly become very possible indeed. The galaxy was beginning to understand that humans didn't just rescue people from impossible situations. They specialized in making impossible situations afraid of them.